Strange book. My grandmother has told me the following story in bits and pieces as she wasn't very keen on telling the story. But over the years, I have talked to her about on many occasions when we were alone. It all started with my grandfather being sent out for the German army to fight in France during World War I. In some remote village, he found a strange book in the rubble and remains of a church and kept it during the rest of his time in the war. When he returned home, he started reading the book. It was a bit hard for him as it wasn't his native language. My grandmother couldn't tell me what language it was written in. The more he read in the book, the more worried he grew as it was a mean book. He kept the book in his possession for a number of years, but was always very tense and nervous when he stumbled upon it. I was told it was about witchcraft and spells and black magic. It was quite an old book, already at the time that he found it. After a lot of years, he got enough of it and decided to burn the book, so he put it in his fireplace. The next morning, he found that the book had reappeared on a table. A bit confused, he burned it again several times, but it kept reappearing. Very worried, he threw the book in the ocean, but as previous, it reappeared the next day. Baffled and worried, he contacted a local priest who came and took a look at the book and didn't know what to do, so they contacted some more qualified priest that came and took the book away. After that, the book didn't reappear. This story has always interested me a lot, especially since my grandmother's side of the family seems to be really in contact with the other side. I don't know how to write that in English, and she was clearly nervous with the story. Actually, me and my father were the only ones ever to get the story from her. Has anybody heard of a story like that before? Cursed book. It all started when I went to a yard sale at a church 3 years ago. I didn't really go to church often since I was always busy, but my parents dragged me here anyways. I was just walking around, looking randomly at things, when I stopped dead in my tracks, because I found this orange bright book sitting in a pile and covered a bit. So I gently picked it up as it seemed very old, and in fact it was. In every page I flipped, it was completely blank, every page. Later on, I bought it with a few more books, and I soon headed home. As I was in the car, I began to look at the orange book, but a little more carefully. I later found out it had a St. George Hotel sign on the cover. I continued to look at it, and then I opened the book and started to flip. But then I noticed there was writing on the first page. So I went back there and I noticed this was a journal from 1938, October 1st to October 8th. But it was a bit hard to read, especially the writing since it was so smudged and in cursive. For some reason, I showed my stepdad and immediately he told me to get rid of it, but I simply said no. And that is when he got mad. I ran into my room and quickly hid my book in a place where he couldn't find it. But as I keep this book, more things start to happen, more and more things. I noticed more spirits around me and more demon appearances coming at me. As I read this book, it has a weird feeling and this energy I cannot describe. When I was reading it the other day, this pale man entered my room and simply looked at me while I read it. And when I set it back down, he simply walked away, not making any eye contact with me. I later showed my friend this book, and he told me that it was cursed. At that point, I was curious, so when I was outside, I brought the book with me and looked at the back, and I noticed it was ruined. I grabbed the pencil and quickly drew over it, but that's when I stopped, as I saw the same pale man just watching me from afar, as if he was just waiting for something. I knew by now that Pale Man was a spirit, so I got up, walked around, and tried not to make any contact with him. So I ask you this, what should I do with this book? I still have the book and it is currently in my room hiding. A demon crossed over. My experience happened about 3 months ago. I have always been a believer of the paranormal. I have seen things in my lifetime most people laugh about or joke around with. The truth is there is another world out there, a spiritual world, and the experiences I will talk about is one that until today still scares me. There isn't a day that goes by where I don't think about it. It all began with a book my sister-in-law insisted I should read. As a curious one, I opened it and began to read one page after the other. This book spoke of ways to bring spirits back to speak to them. It gave detailed descriptions of sacrifices and named names of demons that would help through all these practices. A few paragraphs in, I decided this was too much for me, so I returned the book and figured I'd forget about it soon. I was so wrong. That night, I was on the phone with my boyfriend as I lay on my bed, and in a moment this strong, violent wind came blowing, hitting my back with great force. This made me very cold and scared at the same time. I was too scared to look back because this wind came out of nowhere. My window was sealed shut. As a younger kid, there wasn't an explanation for why this was even happening at all. Then I felt something was staring at me, and I grew more and more anxious and scared, and I tried yelling for help, but it was as though I was paralyzed. From the distance in the wind, I could hear this vicious dog sound like approaching me, getting closer and closer. Only I knew deep inside it was not a dog, but a demon. I was once a strong Catholic, so I claimed the blood of Jesus. In my mind, since I couldn't talk, I told the demon the Lord was on my side and that he couldn't take me or hurt me like he wanted to. I kept praying until I came back, and I could finally hear my boyfriend on the phone again. I asked him if he had heard something, and his response was that it had been absolutely quiet, and that he had thought I had fallen asleep. But I knew this was something real because I tried calling for my boyfriend for help, but when I tried to do that, nothing came out of my mouth. I never went to sleep that night, and I know I opened some kind of door by reading that book. And the next few days proved it to me. It was right. I took a camping trip with my boyfriend's family the next couple of days. I was relieved I didn't want to sleep in my room again. I thought it would all stop, and I'd finally have some peace. Again. I was so wrong. Every night of that trip, this thing came back and just sat at the foot of the bunk beds, where'd I hear it growl, and it would be a constant battle to make it go away. Not one of those nights was I alone, yet no one heard or saw anything. As ironic as this may sound, I knew this demon from before all these things started happening. I had seen him in my dreams. I guess reading that book made him more powerful somehow, and now he was after me, and I don't know exactly what he wants from me. As soon as I made it home from the trip, I called my sister and I insisted she come down and pray for me. We decided I would sneak that book from my sister-in-law's room, and we would burn it as we prayed and asked protection from God. The hour came and we began. I won't forget that day. It seemed that as we began to pray, a strong wind started trying to blow away all the pages of the book we had torn out. It took hours before all the pages were consumed, and I saw the demon run through my window. I knew then things would be okay, as a big sense of relief came over me. My sister and I talked about our experience, and she described a demon that looked like a dog, only he stood on 2 legs and was taller than the both of us with red eyes and pointy ears. Again, I have seen this demon before, but never so close. I was glad it was finally over. I could sleep again. Since this happened, my sister-in-law doesn't talk to me. She has done so many things to be sure I'm miserable, and I know why. She shared this demon with me for a few brief days, and I pissed it off. I only hope one day she turns to God. Practicing things like this ties you down, so be careful with what you read. I learned my lesson. I'm sorry if this was long. It was my true story. Hope you believe that these things truly do exist.